have hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of suspects. It's a needle in a haystack problem. Where do you start?
In 1888, the most notorious serial killer of all, Jack the Ripper, killed 5 women in London's East End. Since then, countless people have tried to solve the mystery of the Ripper's identity. But Rosmo thinks he could have tracked him down without seeing a scrap of evidence. Because he's worked out where Jack the Ripper most likely lived, based only on the location of the crimes.
Flower and Dean Street should have been the epicenter of their search.
And all he used to do it is an equation.
Inherently, we're all lazy, and criminals just as much as anyone else. They want to accomplish their goals closer to home rather than further away because it involves too much effort, too much time, too much travel.
The first half of Rosmo's equation models what's known as the least effort principle. It means that the crime locations are statistically more likely the nearer they are to where the offender lives.
If you have a choice of going to the corner store for a loaf of bread or going to one that's 7 miles down the road, you're going to pick the corner store.
It seems a bit gruesome to apply the same thing to a serial killer as to going and buying a loaf of bread or milk.
Well, actually, if we can get over the horrible nature of these crimes and recognize that these are human beings like the rest of us, we can, because we understand ourselves, maybe get some understanding of these individuals.
The second half of the equation describes something called the buffer zone. Criminals avoid committing crimes too close to home for fear of drawing attention to themselves. It's the interaction of these two behaviours that allows Rosmo to calculate the most probable location of the criminal.
These individuals have to not only obtain their target or capture a victim, but avoid apprehension by the police and identification by witnesses.
The technique, known as geographic profiling, is now used by police all over the world.
Police are examining the possibility that all explosion near a branch of Barclays Bank in West London was the work of an extortionist.
Police believe the extortion demand came from the blackmailer known as Mardi Gras.
In the late 90s, Rosmo was called in by Scotland Yard to help catch the notorious Mardi Gras bomber, who for 3 years waged a campaign of terror against banks and supermarkets.
A 17-year-old man is recovering in hospital after being injured in an explosion at a Sainsbury's store in South London.
Police are advising the public to be vigilant. In truth, they can only wait to see what Mardi Gras does next.
How many bombs did he let off during that time?
Total, 36 known linked offences. So as you can see, they range from north of Cambridge all the way down to the Strait of Dover, but most of them are in Greater London.
So this is a map showing the locations of all the bombs that were set off?
That's right.
It's certainly a concentration on London, but it looks pretty randomly scattered. So now you're feeding those locations into the equation?
Right, and what we have here now is the geoprofile, and that's going to show us the most likely location where the offender lived, with dark orange being the most likely or the most probable. So we can see that the major focus is around the Chiswick area. And in fact, in the report we prepared for Scotland Yard, we even prioritized postcodes for them.
And how successful was it in this case?
Well, let me show you the locations of the two brothers, Edgar and Ronald Pierce.
Right, but this is really in the hot zone, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Edgar's home is in the top 0.8% of the area of the crimes in Greater London, so less than 1%.
That's extraordinary. Edgar Pierce had demanded £10,000 a day from Barclays. And when he and his brother tried to collect it from a cash point in Chiswick, the police were waiting.
Two brothers in their 60s have been remanded in custody by magistrates in connection with the so-called Mardi Gras bombings.
Ronald and Edgar Pierce, both from Chiswick in West London, each faced 3 conspiracy charges.
It was recognized.
Based on the apparently random location of 36 bombs, Rosmer's geographic profile narrowed the location of the Mardi Gras bomber from 300 square miles to a postcode in Chiswick. Although his brother Ronald was acquitted, Edgar Pierce pleaded guilty and was jailed for 21 years.
So do you think the bomber was aware that he was creating these patterns?
No, he wasn't. But it's very difficult for humans to engage in completely random behavior.
Very few of us are aware of the patterns we leave behind. From the way we move in a crowd, to the choices we make in a game.
The victim's body was found here in the corner.
Or even how we commit murder.
In reality, these crimes are not random.
None of it is random. It's all part of the code. There are always telltale patterns, and if we're able to decode them, we can use those patterns to model our behaviour. And this leads to the intriguing possibility that if we can reduce human beings to numbers, we might be able to predict our future in the same way as we can predict the movement of the planets or the trajectory of a ball. But the course of our lives never seems to run entirely smoothly, and the future rarely turns out exactly as we'd planned.
I may have a good idea what I'm going to be doing tomorrow, or even next week, but as the weeks turn into months, and the months turn into years, our future becomes far less certain.
Every decision we make, every situation we encounter, every person we meet sends our life down a different path.
As you watch each stick floating off downstream, there's no sure way of predicting their fate. I might be able to hazard a guess where a stick will be in 2 minutes, but what about 2 hours or 2 days?
Months turn into years, our future becomes far less certain.
Life sometimes seems so unpredictable that we think of it as being random. But in fact, it isn't random at all. It's simply a sequence of cause and effect. A freak accident, a slight delay, a missed bus, a broken promise. There are millions of factors that intervene to affect our journey through life. And the tiniest shift in any one of these can completely change its future course.
The white one's got caught in the dam, but the red one's going really fast. I think this would be a good finishing line. When here comes the white. It's way ahead of the red. And white's the winner. Right, let's give it another go.
The truth is, our lives are controlled by the strangest code of all, the code of chaos. Our lives aren't random, they're chaotic. A tangled web of cause and effect, in which insignificant moments can escalate into events that change our lives forever. Any difference, no matter how small, can have a huge effect on the outcome.
It's this incredible sensitivity to even the slightest change which is one of the defining features of chaos.
Because chaotic systems appear so random, it's often difficult to see a pattern. And that has led us to sometimes misinterpret our world in a spectacular manner. These are lemmings. We all know they're stupid, reckless, and suicidal.
The very word lemming has come to mean as much. The trouble is, though, it just isn't true.
Until recently, the legend of lemmings' suicidal behaviour was the accepted explanation for why one year the Arctic can be overrun with them and almost completely empty the next. What no one knew at the time was that the incredible fluctuation in lemming numbers has nothing to do with mass suicide. It's all because of chaos. And there's a simple equation at its heart.
So for example, if I want to know how many lemmings there'll be next year, what I need to do is to take this year's population, P, and multiply that by the growth rate, R. But not all lemmings will survive, so there's a little bit of the equation which tells me how many lemmings will die during the year. So that's R times P times P. So we can rewrite this equation as the growth rate R times P times 1 minus P. Now this equation isn't specific to lemmings, it actually applies to any animal population. And the interesting part of the equation is this number R, the growth rate, because when we choose different values for R, we get a very different behaviour for the population growth.
The growth rate determines how quickly a population expands. For most species of mammal, this is usually below 2. With a growth rate in this range, the equation predicts that a population will steadily rise until it stabilises at a fixed value. But it turns out lemmings are one of the fastest reproducing mammals on the planet.
Let's take R equals 3.1. The lemmings don't stabilise now, but ping-pong between two different values. So the population is high, then low, then back to high again, low again. But when the growth rate reaches a value just over 3.57, then something incredibly unexpected happens.
Rather than levelling off at a fixed number or fluctuating between without seeing a scrap of evidence. Because he's worked out where Jack the Ripper most likely lived, based only on the location of the crimes.
Flower and Dean Street should have been the epicenter of have hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of suspects. It's a needle in a haystack problem. Where do you start?
In 1888, the most notorious serial killer of
Want to accomplish their goals closer to home rather than further away because it involves too much effort, too much time, too much travel.
The first half of Rosmo's equation models what's known as the least effort principle. Or Jack the Ripper killed 5 women in London's East End. Since then, countless people have tried to solve the mystery of the Ripper's identity. But Rosmo thinks he could have tracked him down.
Their search.
And all he used to do it is an equation.
Inherently, we're all lazy, and criminals just as much as anyone else. They